Okay, this is 100% not the cutest I've ever looked in a video, but it is 90+ degrees outside again, and my apartment does not have good air conditioning. So this is what you get, and if you don't want to look at it, you can, well, do something else while you listen to me talk, I guess. This is probably going to be a long video because I am going to be doing a mega series review, by which I mean I have become obsessed with author Bec McMaster lately, and I have now read 13 books by her, which is 2 connected series, 2 sets of 5, and then a 3rd series which is not connected to that at all. I have more thoughts about the 2 connected 5 book series, so I'm going to talk about all of them really quickly today. I do not plan to include spoilers, so I may talk kind of vaguely, but I will be discussing the pairings. I don't think that's a huge deal because obviously you'd read it in the blurb, but if you don't like that, then that's just, you know, an FYI as we move into this. I think I can get away with that. So the series in question, the first one, is called the London Steampunk series, and the next 5 books is called the London Steampunk, the Blue Blood Conspiracy. So this entire series is set, you may guess, in steampunk London. So there is that level of fantasy and alternative history for the setting, but also there are blue bloods, or sort of vampires. Let me explain. So in this steampunk London, the echelon or upper aristocrats are filled with people who take the blood rites when they come of age, and this means that they essentially become vampires. Except for, they call becoming a vampire being dosed with something called the craving virus. Now, the trade-off is that they get extended life, and as long as they drink blood, they have, you know, extra strength, extra stamina. It's much harder to kill them. However, once their craving virus levels reach a certain point, they either have to be killed or they turn into then what is a vampire, which is essentially like a lich being. Like they lose all sense of their humanity. They become really gross and awful, kind of zombie-ish almost, and they just go on killing sprees. So they are vampires, but they aren't, kind of, sort of. So the first book in the London Steampunk series is called Kiss of Steel. This follows a female main character whose name is Honoria, and she is trying to support her younger brother and sister. Their father has died, and they are on the run from a blue blood duke who is not a good person. Their father was a renowned scientist who was working on some very off-the-book scientific experiments for this duke, and so they're being hunted there, and they really have nowhere to go. So she goes to this guy named Blade, who is a rogue blue blood. So most of the blue bloods are all in the aristocrat circles. However, there are some people who are infected illegally, and most of them join their police force, but some of them, like Blade, run off into Whitechapel, where he is basically the king of thieves down there. Blade is your prototypical, very like, I fought the establishment and won, and now I'm the king of my kingdom, and roguish kind of a person. And he knows, even though Honoria is trying to hide it, that she is connected to this duke who is his mortal enemy. And so he wants to seduce her to give up what she knows about this guy, and she needs protection. So it kind of forces them into close proximity, and needless to say, they fall in love. In the meantime, secrets are revealed, yada yada yada. This book is an okay opening. It's not that strong, just because I'm like the "you're dangerous but I'm sexually attracted to you" thing. It never works for me. And so the fact that happens when Blade and Honoria meet, like, immediately, I'm just like, ugh. I just want there to be at least one extra thing that makes them start to fall for each other. You know, that didn't need to happen. They could have done a slow burn, you know, in whatever. These books are spicy. That's not a problem, but just in terms of the relationship building, not a fan. However, it was good enough, I was interested enough, and I thought I could probably see where the next book was going, and so I kept reading. So the second book is called Heart of Iron, and this follows Honoria's sister Lena, as well as Blade's second-in-command Will, who is a werewolfen, otherwise known as a werewolf. They're called werewolfen in this series, and Will has been attracted to Lena since she showed up with Honoria, but as a werewolf, he is very worried that he will hurt her, and so he has kind of removed himself from Blade and Honoria's family, which has not worked out well for him. He's very lonely, and Lena, not really finding a place for herself in Whitechapel with Blade and Honoria, has gone back into aristocratic society and is basically working as a spy for a humanist movement. So this book more strongly starts to set the groundwork for the real political tensions here. Lena is up close and personal with the human queen, the blue blood prince consort who controls her and is abusive to her, and this underground humanist movement of humans who are trying to kind of throw off the yoke of blue bloods along with their compatriots, comrades in arms, the mechs. These are people with synthetic limbs who are basically being used for slave labor by the blue bloods. So all of this is going on. Lena gets up to her ears in it, and that pushes Will and Lena back together, kind of from opposite sides. Kind of, sort of. Again, things happen, secrets are revealed, not all is as it appears. This book was much stronger than the first book in the series. Mostly, again, for me, I liked having their relationship more set up. And also, I don't know, Lena felt like a stronger character than Honoria. She had more, I don't know, gumption. It's not saying that Honoria wasn't a strong female character, but Lena is just more willing to take a risk and do a little bit more, whereas Honoria was a very scholastic, like, thinker character. And she and Will also have like a really great relationship in the sense that they know they're attracted to each other, but there are reasons why they can't be together, and that is far more interesting than, oh my god, you're so dangerous, but I can't, like, ugh. It was just better. The thing that happens though is that, so you're thinking, you're reading this book and you're like, okay, so the next person who's gonna get a book is this character or this character. And neither of those things is what happens. So instead, for book 3, you get My Lady Quicksilver, which is a book with Rosalind and Jasper. Now, if you have read books 1 and 2 in this series, you might not even really know who those characters are because they show up so briefly. And for me, it felt like a really abrupt turn. Rosalind and Jasper don't exist really in the same universe as Honoria, Blade, Will, and Lena. So all of the characters that you've gotten to know in that sense are kind of removed, and you end up like in a whole other direction. So this felt really like a choppy transition. Rosalind is the leader of the humanist movement, and Jasper is the head of that police force that I mentioned earlier. They're called the Nighthawks. And so he is a blue blood who is not part of the aristocracy, but he runs their police/detective force. And so Jasper is hunting for Rosalind, and Rosalind decides to infiltrate the Nighthawks, essentially. And as much as I thought this book was an abrupt turn, I ended up really enjoying it because, again, this relationship was just far more complicated and interesting. And again, it introduced more facets of the world, but it's just mostly great because Rosalind is someone who has very specific feelings about blue bloods, and Jasper has very specific feelings about humanists, and kind of accidentally they change each other's minds while they fall in love, not realizing, because Rosalind is infiltrating, that he's falling in love with the head of the humanist movement, but she infuses their conversation with enough talk that it's not only a falling in love, but it's a changing of mentalities in a way that brings both of them to a healthier way of viewing the world. And so as much as this book was an abrupt turn, and I can't really tell you exactly how hard this book turns, I think this is the book really that ends up setting up the final confrontation. This is where it all really starts to come together, and I really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, book 4 for me took another dip down. Book 4 is called Forged by Desire, and it is the story of Garrett and Perry. Garrett and Perry are both Nighthawks, and so again, books 3 and 4 really leave books 1 and 2 kind of off doing their own thing for a really long time. But 4 is directly related to characters you met during book 3. It ended up feeling a little bit like a side quest almost. I get why a lot of this stuff happened, and I can't really discuss it without extremely spoiling the plot. But essentially Perry, who is the only female Nighthawk, is running from some demons in the past, and Garrett is trying to prove worthy of being Jasper Lynch's right-hand man / potential successor at the Nighthawks. And Perry has been into him for a really long time, and Garrett is a womanizer who never noticed her until she showed up for a mission in a dress. And then he was like, oh my god, Perry is pretty, and now I've realized I have feelings for her. It just, the plot as it relates to the main political, revolution brewing in the streets felt like a side quest, and I just didn't like their relationship. I just don't know why a dress changed Garrett's mind and seemed to change his entire personality. It just wasn't great to me, and so I was like, oh, we were getting better and now we're getting worse, and that made me really, really worried for book 5. So book 5 is the one where finally all of the different 1 through 4 characters' arcs all come together in this political revolution brewing in the streets. And it really brings stuff together because the female lead in this one is Lady Aramina, and she has shown up in a couple of the past books as a villain type character. She's the only female aristocratic blue blood. She's a friend of the queen, and therefore all of our pseudo-revolutionaries who we've been following in these other books think that she is a friend of the prince consort because she'll vote along with him in council meetings, etc. And the male lead here is Leo, who is a character who we've been seeing since book 1, who I thought would get a book in book 3 and didn't. He gets this last book, and he has been into Mina, since he met her, but she hates him because she thinks his father killed her father. So there's a lot of misunderstanding. There is a lot of mixed signals, mixed messages, and so this book really is an untangling where you see all of these disparate threads, these books where 1 and 2 felt kind of removed from 3 and 4, and it all comes together with the added layer of really bringing to light Mina's character in particular, and how we have probably been misjudging her in the last couple of books, unless there were signs that I missed. And like I said, unfortunately that's like a little bit of a spoiler, but I'm not going to tell you how much we misjudged her. Again, it's in the blurb. You know how it be. There's a really awesome ending to this. A whole bunch of other characters show up. There is consequence. There is passion, there is emotion, and is some of it a little cliche? Sure it is. But after feeling like the pacing of the books was kind of choppy, I really ended up enjoying how the series came together as a whole. I thought that that was really well done. So, having had a pretty decent reading experience with the first 5 books, I wanted to go on and read the Blue Blood Conspiracy series. There is a time jump of several years after the events of the last book in that series, and there is a new threat to the political structure. And so a character who shows up very minimally in the previous 5 books collects a team of spies on Ocean's 11. They end up calling themselves the Company of Rogues, and it's a mech, some blue bloods, a werewolf, and so they're just like a motley crew of a trained assassin and a trained assassin butler who is a side character for all of them, but he's so hysterical. Anyway, I'm sorry. It's okay. And so I was like, okay, I'll give this a try. And I had kind of become used to in the first 5 books that even the ones that have like better relationships, there was an element of very surface level attraction to start with that got better. And I was like, and I didn't like the choppiness of that series, but it was better in the end. This series is constructed so much better. The relationships are better, the flow of the stories are better. It was just like such an improvement on the first 5 books, and it made me so glad that I decided to read these. However, I was slightly concerned by the first book. So the first book is called Mission Improper, and it is the story between Ingrid, who is a werewolf who is one of Rosalind's friends, and Caleb Byrne, who is a Nighthawk who shows up in both of the Nighthawk-centric books. And they have both been brought into this company of rogues. And it turns out that in the intervening years between Of Silk and Steel and Mission Improper, they went on or were tasked to do a mission together where they really couldn't work together. She ended up tying him to a bed naked and leaving him there. I think it's the subject of a short story I didn't read, but it set me up on the wrong foot because I understand that I could have read that short story. I didn't realize that it existed, and it made me feel like there was story missing, that these characters had a relationship that I didn't really feel was really developed in this book, the one that I read. And so it left me feeling a little bit sense of loss. It made me feel like their attraction was very surface level. I didn't understand it. So I really was not a fan of that. So while I enjoyed the idea of the story, I'm a huge fan of a team of, spies, heist novels, all that kind of stuff. I just wasn't sure, and I decided to stick past that book because of the plot. Just kind of accepting that the relationships in the series, again, might just fall short of my expectations. Turns out that this book is just not it's the one weak link in this chain. So then what you get is the Mech Who Loved Me. And this again brings back characters that we met in previous books in the first series, very minimally. Ava, who was a blue blood who was turned against her will, and horrible, horrific scientific experiments were done to her. She was taken in by the Nighthawks and is now a crime scene investigator. And Kincaid, who is a mech who helped Rosalind lead the humanist revolution, and they have both been brought into this company of rogues. So much like with the second book of the first series, this is the book where you really start to dig into exactly what this overarching series is going to be about. You get some hints in Mission Improper, But in this one, with the mysterious disappearances, Ava is put on this case, and it originally looks like it's just kind of like a weird case and not really related to this bigger thing that's going on. But turns out not everything is what it seems. But because no one really thinks that this is important, Ava is put on the case even though she usually doesn't leave the lab, and Kincaid is sent along with her because he can't stand really anybody else but Ava, and they don't have anything else to do right now. So Ava is a virgin, and she is tired of being a virgin. She's watching her friends get married and be in relationships, and she feels like she's not really lived her life, and she's like, I just don't want to be a virgin anymore. And it's clear there's a moment in Mission Improper that she is physically attracted to Kincaid, and Kincaid originally is like, I don't want anything to do with you because you're a blue blood and I can't stand that. But there is something very sweet and innocent about Ava, and he says, well, if you want to lose your virginity, I'll do it. And there ends up being more emotional depth to Kincaid than you really realize at the time. And of course, he learns about Ava's past trauma, and we finally hear about that from her. And so I am not usually a fan of the, I'm a virgin and you're a manly man, just make me not a virgin anymore. Like, that normally doesn't do it for me. But there was something about these two, like, she's just so sweet but also whip smart, and he's just super grumpy. Again, this trope normally doesn't work for me, but for whatever reason in this one it did. And that made me feel a lot more positive about continuing the series, even though there was like a moment where they were like, oh, I'm actually attracted to you. I forgave it more in this book, and I was like, okay, that's fine. I can accept this in this book, in this series. It's clearly one of Bec McMaster's things. Like, we'll just move on. And I really need to know what's happening in this conspiracy. Book 3. I got super excited about book 3. It's called You Only Love Twice. And I was excited, first of all, because it is Gemma's book. And Gemma is the trained assassin that I was talking about earlier in the series. And she is also blue blood, but she's a trained assassin. And I love assassin characters. It's like a niche thing for me. And she has more insight to the character of Malloran, who is the guy who has collected the company of rogues. So we really start to see a little bit more about him, who's been a mystery for a while. And then I heard about the romance. And the romance, it's kind of given away in the title, You Only Love Twice, but on a mission to Russia, way earlier in Gemma's life, she fell in love with this guy who was a counter spy, and he ended up realizing that she was a spy, and he shot her, and she's like lived with that pain for a while, so she has not really let herself love anyone since, because that was such a heartbreaking experience. So that guy, she knew him as Dimitri. He is in the book, he goes as Obsidian, is the love interest here. He's actually connected to this larger conspiracy that is trying to take down the government that the company of rogues is trying to fight. I don't really want to give you the details because it will spoil some things about this book, but essentially nothing is what it seems, and this book is not a, oh, I've just met you and I'm deeply attracted to you. It's two people who have done a lot of damage in their lives, who did a lot of damage to each other. They broke trust, coming back together. The stakes are even higher now, and having to untangle both the lies and the misunderstandings between themselves, but also how everything that has happened to them has connected to this larger plot that they are trying to uncover. Loyalties are tested. This book was really, as opposed to all the books in this series, just way more complicated. The backstory goes back way farther, and that just made it way more interesting, and I loved it. And it's just especially this book is a marker of just how much better this series is than the first 5 books. It's just, there's so much more thought out connections, character building. It just fills my soul with joy. So what I was concerned about though is that book 4 would be another kind of like disappointment like it was with the first series. So the 4th book is To Catch a Rogue, and it is Charlie Todd's book. Charlie Todd is the younger brother of Honoria and Lena. So they're already off and married. Charlie Todd now has been aged up. It's a little bit weird having read these books so fast, because to me I was like, no, this man is still a child and now I have to watch an explicit sex scene. Okie doke. But I mean, he is older. He's in his 20s. But it was weird. Maybe don't read them that fast. But what I was worried about is that the love interest here is Lark, who is a childhood friend of Charlie's who we meet and grow to love in the first 5 books as well. She's a protege of Blades from Whitechapel. And something happens at the end of that 5-book series that is very traumatic to Charlie and Lark's relationship, and so they really haven't spoken in that time. However, in You Only Love Twice, something catastrophic happens, and the company of rogues has to take off for Russia to do some heisting. They gotta do some heisting. And because they need to do a heist, they need a master thief, and that is what Lark is. So Charlie approaches Lark and he says, hey, will you help me out? And she really doesn't want to do it until she finds out that they are going to Russia, because it turns out that Lark's past is far more complicated than we ever knew, and she has some connections to Russia. And again, it was this moment of like, I really thought this book was gonna kind of dip and not be as exciting, kind of like a lull before the finale, and instead it was an incredible penultimate book. There are parts of this that are almost in a way better than even the final book. It was so exciting. The landscape totally changed. It's the only book that doesn't take place in London, and the connections, not only the trauma that Charlie and Lark have to get past, which is much different than the trauma that was just dealt with by Gemma and Obsidian. So it still feels unique, even though it's kind of similar. Also has connections to a much larger thing. Like Lark's past is just like a secretly, I was once a circus performer. Like it digs deep again into the larger world building and the larger plot that is going on in a way that I certainly did not expect that story to go. So it just felt, again, so much more thought out, so much better, so much more interesting. And I almost didn't want, I didn't want the series to end. But of course the series must, and the last book in this series is phenomenal. It is a fantastic conclusion to this series. It's called Dukes Are Forever, and it is where Mallorin finally gets his story. Mallorin is of the company of rogues, but for much of the series he's been aloof a little bit because he's the lord that brought them together. In books 3 and 4 specifically, he really gets brought more and more into the story, and it is the love story between him and his wife, Adele. Now, I think it happens in the first or second book that Mallorin and Adele get married. But what you know is that Mallorin didn't want to marry Adele. She trapped him into marriage, and he's not happy about it. After the events of book 4, which I don't want to spoil, Mallorin is really off his game. He is struggling to really get the upper hand in this battle versus good versus evil that the company of rogues is fighting, and his enemy ends up involving Adele. And Mallorin, he not only doesn't love Adele, he doesn't know if he can trust her. And so he comes up with this crazy idea that in order to make her either trust him or at least figure out if she's lying, he's going to seduce her. And Adele is a character that was actually one of Lena's friends, so we have seen her before some trauma happens to her, and now after being married to Mallory, having used him to escape an incredibly traumatizing existence. And I didn't expect her character to come back. I didn't really like her all that much when she was Lena's friend, but this story was just so good. It was so good. I did feel like there was one part of the ending that was a little bit abrupt, but I really didn't care, because I thought that with the stuff that's happened to Mallory and the stuff that's happened to Adele, and so just with them coming together, and Adele is definitely, all of the women in this series are strong in their own way, but Adele is like the feistiest, no holds barred. Even Gemma, who was a lot like that, like she was so focused on getting Obsidian back and like her own self-pain that she was a little bit, I think, more muted. And Adele is just like, we're already married, you're not gonna divorce me, like I hate you, you hate me, we're just gonna like battle to the death with our words. It was really, really feisty romance and really funny. Also because up until this point, Mallory has been so kind of aloof, to see him just like flummoxed by his human wife. It was good. And then this series also brings back a lot of the characters from the first 5 books, because they're all needed to save the world. And so you also get to see them come back, and some stuff happens to them and you see where they are. So I just felt like this series was so much stronger. The relationships were better, the world building was better. And I do think that you want to read the first 5 books, but if you don't feel like committing to 10 books, I do think you can read just the Blue Blood Conspiracy on its own. You'll miss a little bit of character nuance, but they do a really good job of like telling you what happened. Except, like I said, in Mission Improper. Do not rate this series off of Mission Improper. It gets so much better as you go along. I know this has been really long, but when I considered doing a review of these 2 series independently, I knew that to me, it just wouldn't work, because they exist in my mind in direct connection, not just because they're related, but because the Blue Blood Conspiracy improves on so much of what bugged me in the original London Steampunk series. And there is nothing more satisfying to me than seeing an author grow, which is to me what I translate that to. Is just author growth and better writing, and someone really working on their craft and their writing to give a better reading experience, and keeping all the stuff that I loved but just shining it up. So if you've not heard of Bec McMaster, this is an incredible series. If vampires are not for you, I just finished her most recent series, which is a pseudo Hades and Persephone retelling. I enjoyed it. I might do a review of that series at some other time. I just don't have as many thoughts because I just liked it. But Bec McMaster is an author for me where I'm just so glad that I read one of her books, because now I want to read all of them. And so I hope maybe I've inspired you to do the same if you're still here watching this really long video. Thanks, guys. Bye.